Good to see you all. I'm going to get us started, although as we know how these things go, I'm sure we'll have folks continue to trickle in. Yeah, just on a quick logistical note, Ron's using a lav mic this morning and I have a handheld, so in the event that you do have a question to ask, please raise your hand and I'll run the microphone to you. That's important just so everyone in the room can hear and folks on the recording can hear it as well. So as we light our candle, as we come together, we are mindful that we gathered this morning on the land of the Anishinaabe, the people of the three fires. And just as we gather in the light of Christ's light, we acknowledge that they have held light in this land for centuries now, and that we are guests on their land. And one way that we are practicing right relationship in a history of colonization, forced removal, and cultural erasure is to learn and to build relationships. And so we are so grateful to have Ron Yob with us this morning. Ron is the chairman of the Grand River Band of Ottawa Indians, which I believe has 19 member bands, or had originally, that were along the Grand River. Ron is a longtime teacher in the Grand Rapids public school system. He's an avid storyteller and loves to educate. So I know Ron will really love your questions. And he has a wealth of wisdom and experience to share with us. So Ron, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Ron Yob, Indigenous, Kitchibawa, Tina, Georgia, Mashike, Odama, Ogama, Kitchi, I'll stop there with the language, but I just wanted to do a little bit of language to show you that our people still never lost their language. The government tried to take it from us, but we never lost it. And I was thinking, I wish I had a match to light that candle, and then I looked over there, and there was a match, so I thought that was really nice. It was and all our gatherings, we'll have a fire of some sorts, and it doesn't have to be, young kids will start this, they'll have a fire going to the ceiling, you know, and they think they have to have a giant fire, but the symbolism of that fire is doesn't have to be a big fire, it's a fire. Ishkadeh is our term for fire, and we use that fire in our gatherings and in our prayers. A lot of times we will put we generally use 4 words. We use cedar and sweet grass and sage and tobacco, and we'll put a little bit of that, a pinch of that. We'll always use our left hand because we feel that that's closer to our heart, you know, and we'll always put a little as an offering into the fire. And we say that the smoke from that offering goes to the Creator. So that's one of the reasons we use that fire. So I'm so glad that it had that fire. In fact, now that I see that, I'm probably going to bring a little candle with me when I go other places. You know, I never thought about that bringing a candle, you know. But we always use fires. And I love this room. I just, when I was a teacher, I would have my children sitting similar to you. A lot of our teachings revolve around the circle, and one of the things is with that circle, it puts everybody at an equal position, you know, and you're not in the front, or you're not in the back, or you're not hiding out somewhere. You're pretty much close to you're equal to everybody, you know. That's what we do. It's kind of funny with our Oklamas, our chiefs. You know, it's hard to tell who they are because they don't want to be identified as being a leader so much as one of the people. You know, so we don't usually stand up at a pedestal or on a stage or anything like that. You know. And that I'm glad he did bring a mic because I know time is short and I'll be here for, I can talk all day. I can be here till dark if you let me. But I learned that when I would talk to like elementary kids, sometimes the kids would never, I realized that I never covered any issues that they wanted me to cover. And so what I ended up doing was having the kids, I called the teacher earlier, like a month ahead of time, and tell her that I had the kids email me what they want to learn about. So then I could cover their subject, and it would be so sad when someone at the end of the talk would say, I wish you would have talked about canoes, or I wish you would have talked about food, or I wish you would have talked some language. And then I felt so bad that I didn't get to cover that. And then kids, especially elementary, are on schedule, so you got to keep them rolling. So I encourage you that at any point, if you have a question or want me to go any direction, just raise your hand or somehow get the attention, and I'm sure he'll bring the mic to you. I know a lot of times people don't get to talk when they hear a speaker. I was a professor for 10 years at Aquinas, and when I went there, I encouraged the kids to participate in the class and talk, but they were so used to just sitting in the classroom and not talking that they thought it was improper to talk. You know, and it took about 3 weeks before they really started engaging, you know. So I encourage that, you know. I can go on how different directions. I ended up starting when I taught in the Grand Rapids schools. I taught in a native alternative school, and I should tell you this. I was pretty much a wild child when I grew up. You know, I still have a Harley Davidson, and I rode with the outlaw biker gangs, and I probably did every drug in the book, and I was full-blown alcoholic and all that stuff. You know, I was a pretty wild child, you know. And but I went to parochial schools. I went to Catholic Central down here. They talk about it takes a community to raise a child. Well, I'm a child that was raised by this community. I was born at St. Mary's down the block, and I went to St. Peter and Paul's and St. Alphonsus, and I went to Catholic Central, and then I went to community college, and I went to Grand Valley. So I pretty much, you know, was a part of the fabric of this community, you know. Well, one thing that I know that the parochial schools did to me was they really made me smart. You know, I taught in public schools and realized that the public schools they don't train the kids as much as the parochial schools do. You know, I didn't like it at the time, but when I got out, I realized what the nuns were doing. You know, or you know, the discipline there that they put on you. And one way we got buy-in at Catholic Central was you either had to be rich, or you had to be holy, or you had to be smart. Well, I wasn't rich, and I wasn't necessarily holy, but I was smart. So when I got through college at Grand Valley, in the Grand Rapids area, we had a 78% dropout rate of Native children. And so basically one in five was getting through high school. And then the Grand Rapids, I hate to say it, they just push kids through. You know, you just come to class and you're going to go to the next year. You know, we don't care if you know anything. You're going to the next grade. And so that 1 out of 5 wasn't really ready for society either. You know, to go into the workforce or to have work ethics or to support families and stuff. And anyway, that a group of elder Indian women come and got me. They knew I was graduating from college, and they come and got me, and they asked me if I would start a program for their children and to keep them in school. And I said, "Now wait a minute, you know, I'm not quite the role model you might want for your kids, you know." And they knew I didn't take a lot of crap from anybody, so they wanted me to be their, kind of their leader person, you know, or whatever, and work with their children. And I said, all right, you know, it gave me an instant job after college, you know. And it's funny because they went to the school board and petitioned them to do this, and this was older Indian women. There were 5, 6 of them, you know. And I'll tell you one thing, I've said this a lot of times, I've been in probably 1,000 arguments with women before, and I never won one. So I had to take the, you know, accept their askings, you know. And so they went to the school board and petitioned them to allow me to start a program within the schools. So I ended up starting I was like a classroom, a school within a school, you know. And I still remember the first day I went to class, I rolled up on a Harley, and I had a lot more hair then, a long ponytail, and these kids thought, man, this is our teacher, you know. And my first day of class, I had probably 10, 12 kids on Monday that showed up. And then on Tuesday, there was probably about 20, 25 kids, because they went out in the community and started talking to other kids. And on Wednesday, they had about 30, 35 kids. All of a sudden, the word spread, you know, and they had no social media back then or anything. This was word of mouth to these other kids, you know. And when I went to class on Wednesday morning, I can remember this like it was yesterday. I went to that class and I seen all these kids and they're all in their seats there. And one thing I seen in them was kind of like hope, you know, like, you know, because everybody wants to go to school. They might not fit in the right peg, but they want to go to school. And I seen all these kids looking at me, you know, and their eyeballs looked like little mirrors, you know. And when I look at them, and you know what you see when you look in a mirror? You see yourself. And that Wednesday, and this was 1974. That Wednesday, I thought, oh my gosh, these kids are taking the same path I took, you know. And that afternoon, that evening, I made it a point to quit drinking. And I thought it might last till tonight, it might last till the weekend, it might last a month. But now it's like, I haven't picked it up since then. I haven't had a drop of alcohol since 1974. And that was those children that was those children that really made me turn that corner, you know. When I knew at this point I had to turn into a role model for them, you know. And these children were, I hate to call them basket cases, but they were very dysfunctional because if it wasn't the children themselves, it was their parents and grandparents that were products of boarding school. My mother was a product of boarding school, and when she was almost 5, not quite 5, like 4 years, 10 months, something like that, they came to her house, and the government came to her house and just took her. You know, and there was no warning, like we're coming, because if they gave you a warning, these kids, they'd go hide them, you know, and they just took her and her brother, and they took them up to Harbor Springs to boarding school. And at that point, my mother didn't talk a word of English, her brother didn't talk a word of English, and they were taken up there to learn ways of the dominant culture. And it's sad because I liken it to like if you buy a computer. When you get a computer, all the computers they have what do you call it? They're programmed for just a computer, and then you start programming what you're going to do with it. Like if you're a sports nut, you're going to put sports stuff. If you're an educator, you might put those things in there. If you're into fashion or music, you can put that in there. And so these kids at 4 or 5 years old, they were like empty computers. And all of a sudden they're being programmed by that culture. not by their mothers, their fathers, their aunties and uncles, their grandmas and grandpas, but they were going to learn the ways of the dominant culture. And so they were away from their home, so they were forbidden to do anything that was culturally tied to them, you know. So when these kids got out, sad to say, but they were ostracized by their community because they didn't know any ways. You know, they knew math and spelling and language arts, which is good, but they didn't know any kind of remedies to things that come up in life, or how to live a certain way, or they didn't know that. You know, it was a real sad deal, and it really traumatized these kids, because all of a sudden they weren't part of their own culture anymore. You know, it's like, I don't know how any of you would feel. You're a little older, so what would you have felt for your children or your grandchildren? All of a sudden were just abruptly taken away from their homes, and they're, you know, we're going to teach you a whole other way to live, you know. And not that there was anything wrong with the way they lived, but they didn't know how to. They just were made to go into another culture. Well, it was so traumatic in the 1950s. In the house I grew up in on Elizabeth Street on the west side, we had. This was real fortunate because there used to be a bootlegger that lived in that house before my parents bought it. And so there was these little hidden tunnels, and there was a little room in the back that was where he had the still. It was still actually there yet, and little jugs, you know, and stuff. And when someone important would come to the door, my mother, she was so traumatized yet, that was 25, 30 years later, that we had little drills where we had to go around and hide. You know, and we couldn't breathe, and we couldn't shuffle around, and we had to be totally quiet, you know, and every once in a while she'd tell us, okay, you guys get to your hiding places, and we were so scared as kids that we were going to get taken away, you know. Well, that was just one example of how I grew up, but the children I had in my classroom, they all had little examples like that. They were still traumatized the next generation over, and to this day, there's still kids that are very, very distrustful of the dominant culture. They just are. It's going to be hard to get it out of them, you know. So here I had a room full of kids that really didn't want to participate in anything. They were pretty isolated where they grew up and where they lived, and they stayed in their own little groups, you know. And it was a sad deal. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them, then I'll move on. But one thing I remember, this person came to me, and I'm not sure if you guys would know because you're older, but I don't know if you remember what flop houses were. But they were houses where someone could come. Yeah, anyone could come and stay there. You know, the homeless people would come to them, and they just, you know, they would kind of co-op with what they could get for food or whatever, you know. And I remember this guy come up to me and he asked me, he says, well, we're having it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas. We don't have any money in our house, and we really can't have a dinner or a celebration of this holiday, you know. And he asked if I could help him out a little bit. And I said, well, let me come to your house so I can see what's going on. And I knew where it was. I had been there before. And I went there, and there were a couple, 3 of my old students there, and some little tiny kids, running around. And there was also a bunch of older people, aunties and uncles, and just street people that were living there. And when I went in there, they were sleeping along the walls, and they were sleeping on the couch, and there was broken bottles and old beer bottles, whiskey bottles on the floor, and the place was a total mess, you know. And they're raising all these little kids there, you know. And these kids, because of the boarding school, they didn't really respect the police department or the principals or the teachers or the counselors or the social workers. They were encouraged by their parents because of what happened to them. They didn't really respect these people. And so with their aunties and uncles, the majority of being alcoholic or dysfunctional in some way. They didn't work, or they didn't have jobs, or they didn't have educational skills, you know, they had bad health. They really didn't respect these people. And it ended up boiling down to that they didn't even respect themselves. And when you don't respect yourself, you're in trouble, you know. And these kids, that's how these kids were being raised. And that's the trauma that was still coming on to them. Well, these are the same kids that I ended up being my students there, you know. But they all had one common thing, was they had hope that they maybe will be something, you know. And so I spent a lot of time doing things to raise their esteem. Because at that time, they didn't have people that were elected officials, they didn't have people in their culture that were sports stars, they didn't have people that were music stars, they were people that were in the lower end of society, and these kids felt that that was their destination in life, to be that way. But they were all very smart kids, you know. One thing about street kids is they get real smart. They might not be able to do decimals and percents and algebra and calculus, geometry, whatever, but they're very experts at personal skills, I want to call them, because they could. It's like a. I hate to compare them to dogs, but like a dog, someone can come in the door and that dog will right away know if I should bite him. You know, they just do. They just. These kids have that skill, you know. They know how to react to people, you know. But I brought them in, and it was, I called it organized chaos, because I had these kids that were never had to sit in a chair, they never had to do assignments, they never had to do anything, you know. And I worked with them, because I was one of those kids. You know, and so they couldn't, there was nothing they could do to shock me, you know. And so I just dealt with them all, you know. It just, you know, it's so funny because they ended up getting really smart. I mean, academically smart. One time they tested these kids, well, they tested them every year. First thing I would do with these kids when they come in is I would test them to see what levels they were at. And they were typically 4, 5, 6 years behind. And you could never tell. I had 11-year-old kids that could do algebra, and I had 18-year-old kids that couldn't subtract, you know. So you never knew. Everybody was individual, so I had to test each one. And then what I would do is say they tested out at 5th grade, 7th month. I would start them out in their schoolwork at 5th grade, 1st month. So right off the bat, they knew what they were doing. And they thought, well, this work is easy, you know. But they didn't realize it snuck up on them. And then I had, they had to have a proficiency rate of like 97, 98% to keep moving on. And so they never got behind. I mean, in 1 year, they tested these kids. I remember 1 year, in a principal from another school, she wanted the native kids real bad, because it was a dollar thing to her, not that she wanted to help them so much. But they tested them, and these kids ended up testing. They were, on the average, they were gaining 3 years in a year. And she said, well, that's not right, that's impossible, you know. But see, I was going after their deficits, so that, of course, if you correct all their deficits, all of a sudden they get really smart really quick. And testing and evaluation from the Grand Rapids Public Schools came in, and they said, well, we're going to retest those kids. And I said, why? And they said, because they could never have done that. These are kids that wouldn't go to school, that were unteachable, that were, something's wrong. And they said I was cheating and helping them out with their tests and stuff. I said, no, I'm not. Because I want to know where they're at myself. And so they came in and they put them in the cafeteria and they set them at separate tables, everybody, and they had monitors there that watched them so they couldn't cheat. And I told these kids this was going to happen, and they got all upset. They didn't want to do it, you know, and they were going to walk out and everything. I said, no, just go show them up, you know, go take your test. So, of course, they retested them, and the kids ended up testing higher than the first time. And after that, they never bothered me about my tactics, They never bothered me.
You taught him something.
Pardon?
Sounds like you were a good teacher.
Well, no, I don't know so much as a good teacher as they were good learners.
Well, both of those things go together often, so. Hillary Skolton stopped by to try to wave and say hello, so
I did see
I
that.
passed that along to her. She
Sorry.
didn't get here quite before we started. But Representative Rachel Hood also gave us your name. And I know that you've been doing lots of work for the federal recognition as well of your land, and wonder if you can share a bit about that as well.
First thing I want to say something about Hillary Skolton. And there's only one thing that I see that's, I don't want to call it wrong, but it's a thing about Hillary Skolton, is she's too honest. Well, she expects everybody in Washington to be the same way. And she expects everybody to be that way, and she doesn't scrutinize people as much as she trusts them. Mm-hmm. And she's just, I went, because of our efforts to reaffirm our status with the federal government, we go to all the elected officials and let them know who we are, so they don't think we were in the background somewhere hiding under a carpet. We go right up front and be transparent and say, this is who we are, this is what we're doing. And when we went to see Hillary Skolton, she immediately reached out to us and asked how she could help. She didn't hesitate. And Rachel Hood the same way. They didn't blink an eye. They heard our story and they talked to us and they had their team scrutinize us and she asked how she can help. So she's been a definite champion of our cause. What she's talking about is we're trying to reaffirm our status with the federal government as a recognized tribe. It's sad because, like, when they signed the treaties, they came to us as the stewards of the land and signed treaties with us, so they recognized us then. When they came and grabbed my mother and uncle and the other natives and took them to boarding school, they recognized them as natives then. In the late 1970s, we got a settlement for the 1821 treaty. And they recognized us. It took that many years to finally get a settlement, from 1821 to 1979. They recognized us then and gave us a settlement. We got a settlement in 2007 for the 1836 treaty. So they recognized us, 170 years later, they recognized us as the people of this land then, Now, we're having to reaffirm our status one more time. We've never been terminated. We're still here. We contract to the government roles. One thing fortunate about natives is they did a lot of census with us when they did the initial annuity payments, and so we can actually track ourselves. It's real easy for us to track ourselves to the early 1800s, rather than other people that come over, say, European descent, because a lot of their records are overseas. So for us, the government kept our records, so we're there's certain lucky things that happen to us. Oh, and if you look at Michigan, they got the Little Traverse tribe, they got the Grand Traverse tribe, Little River tribe over here. I'm backwards, so I'm trying to figure that out. Little River tribe, they got the Pocahontas, the Huron band, the Gun Lake band. But right in the middle, there's a hole. And it's like a hole in the middle of a donut, and that's the Grand River band. And I mean, come on, the rapids were the most plush, most environmentally sound area in Michigan, actually. And And that's where our band comes from, and how would you, I mean, even, how do you argue that there were no Indians in the most plush area, you know?
Right, right. No.
And our band, like Mark said, they consist of 19 bands that exist along the Grand River, starting near Jackson, Michigan, and coming all the way to Grand Haven, you know. Basically, wherever there was a river mouth, there was a village. And so, and we're bands, plural. The other tribes across the whole United States are a single band, you know, because there'll be Grand Traverse Band, Saginaw Chippewa Band, Waukegan Band. But because when they treated us, they treated all 19 tribes that existed along the river as one lump group of people. So they treated us as bands. So, and when I go to Washington, it kind of confuses people at first. I have to explain it to them. But they said, well, how can you represent several bands, not just one specific group of people? But our people spread, you know, from Grand Haven and Concrete Creek and Low, where the flat comes in, and where the road comes in, and Maple River, Cedar River, Concrete Creek, wherever there was a tributary that come into the Grand River, we would have a village, you know, and then that river was our highway, you know, so the people could go back and forth up and down that river, and not so much in canoes as much as if you follow a river, you don't get lost. You know, you can walk all the way, you know, get all the way to Lansing just following the river if you want to. If you know that, and you guys would, the outlay of Grand Rapids, if you look at the roads that come in, like Walker Avenue or Chicago Drive or State Street. In fact, we're probably right on the trail right here for State Street. I see where they just finally deeded it over to the buildings, because at one time it was State Street comes in diagonally, Plainfield comes in diagonally, Robinson Road, and all those were actually Indian trails. And they all come in at like wagon wheels on a spoke, and they end up right around Fulton, and the river is where they all kind of come into, you know, but they all follow kind of rivers, you know. But that's the place that we're the only tribe in the Lower Peninsula, and a treaty tribe that is unrecognized at this point, you know. And it's crazy because they all come in here because this was a plushes area. If you study environmental issues, the most plush area for everybody is the rapids recharge the river, put oxygen in it, and the vegetation and wildlife and the plants and the fish, insects, turtles, reptiles, I don't care, mammals, they all want to be right there, and that's where Grand Rapids is, you know, and that's where our tribe comes from, right there. Now, one of the reasons.
So I'm wondering, what needs to happen? What needs to happen so you can get recognized again? What's the process?
In 1935, this was happening to a lot of tribes across the United States, that the government was refusing to recognize them. And see, it gets crazy because administrations change. And so whenever an administration changes, everything kind of flip-flops. And then as soon as it kind of settles out again, another administration comes in and it gets real flip-flop. So in 1934, was something called the Indian Reorganization Act, and it provided methods for tribes to research themselves out and to get reaffirmed of their status with the federal government. You know, and I'll tell you why we want to reaffirm in a second, but I'll go through with your question first. It provided a system to what you had to show that you're connected. You had to track yourself to roles, the government roles. You had to show that you weren't terminated. You had to show that you're still a distinct community. And they provided that, but you know, that was 1934, and the Grand Traverse tribe provided petition in 1934, they submitted their intent to petition, and they got their status back in 1980. So it took that long for them to go through that process, you know.
Are you hopeful with this administration?
This is, I don't know what your political affiliation is, but the tribe has never been recognized under a Republican administration. Every single one that's ever been recognized has been done under a Democratic. It just, you know, I don't know, kind of cut on, you know, there's, people have their own way of, you know, you have to have hops and doves. You have to have both sides. I mean, you can't let one of them overtake the other either, because it's kind of a built-in checks and balance with different administrations. So I'm not, but I guess I'm hopeful. We initially petitioned in 1994 was our actual first letter of intent to petition. See, because we always thought we didn't have to petition. You know, why should we have to prove who we are? We're getting land settlements. We're getting other things. You know, I in the early 1970s, I went to community college and got not community college, but Grand Valley, and got a Bureau of Indian Affairs grant, you know, at that point, you know. And so they were recognizing at that point, you know. See, that's one of the reasons we're petitioning, and it's not necessarily for the generation that's alive today as much as the future generations, because there's things that were guaranteed in our treaties, like education and healthcare and repatriation issues. That's a whole other issue. With our children being taken away at that whole, you know, at such an alarming rate, there was something called the Indian Child Welfare Act that allowed us to protect our children. There's something called, and you don't hear much about these, but there was actually in 1978 a Native American Freedom of Religion Act, that we were allowed to practice our religion again, because it was always being practiced, but you couldn't do it openly. You know, there was actually federal laws that natives couldn't dance and sing, because they felt that it was taken, you know, it was taken away from the dominant religions, and it was allowing them to build inner strength within themselves, and they just didn't want the people to do that. So there was actually federal laws that you can't do that. But it almost reminded me of the catacombs, you know, how we practice religion secretively, you know, because we were always taught certain things, but we were always taught not to let anybody know you're doing this, you know, and there was nothing wrong, you know. Our ceremonies are like anyone else's. You have a child, you have a gathering to celebrate that birth, that new life, and wish that that child is going to lead a productive life, you know, or if you have a death, you go and then mourn with the family and you know, condolences and things, or you know, anything. There was nothing we were doing that was wrong, you know, but they just wanted us to do it under their umbrella, kind of, you know. So we still do that, but by gaining federal recognition, then we can allow the next generation to start being who they are, you know. And I think it's important for that fabric of America to have a lot of different religions, to have a lot of different people, you know. Everybody shouldn't be the same, and you know, it's just healthy, you know. A diverse environment is a healthy environment, you know. You know, you can't let one take over the other. So in my classroom, one of the things I would make my students do was I would make them, I'd figure out what tribe they were from. And I would have them, like say they were Grand Traverse tribe from up by Northport area, I would have them research that tribe. And back then we didn't have the internet and Google and stuff like that, you know. So I had them research like where their tribe was from, any kind of history they could have of their tribe, any kind of documentation of their tribal chiefs, anything, whether they had different traits like maple syrup gathering or wild rice gathering or, you know, because it's outreaching a lot of that stuff, I would have these kids research everything the kids about their tribes, and I also would have them research the treaties their tribes had with the federal government, and these kids were being able to exercise those rights. Well, the kids in Grand Rapids itself, in the majority, I think I had 60-some% of my kids were Grand River Band kids, and they said, well, we don't have those rights, you know, because not non-federally recognized, and they basically told me that if I'm not going to do anything about it, then don't talk about it. It's kind of like, you know, put out or shut up, you know, or something, you know. And so I organized I wanted to see how many Grand River kids, how many Grand River people, not children alone, but kids there were, and I asked them, if you want me to do something about this, I'll do what I can do about it. So in 1994, after I established a count of how many people of ours were there and wanted me to do this, of course, it's kind of like if you open your mouth, you gotta watch out. And they asked me to do this, and I petitioned the office. They created with that Indian Reorganization Act something called the Office of Federal Acknowledgement. And so I wrote a formal letter to them petitioning them that we intend to reaffirm our status with the government, you know, and that was 1994, so it's 29 years ago, you know. And so they told us the steps we had to go through, so we went and what they did was, what our people have to do is they have to track to a roll from 1910 called the Durant Roll. And at that time, the natives of Michigan were petitioning the government that you totally forgot about our rights, you know, and the government said, well, there's no Indians left in Michigan. We says, well, yes, there is. They're all over the place. And so they sent a guy named Horace Duran up to Michigan. He was an attorney, and he had lived in, he come from Oklahoma. Oklahoma, at one time, the government's intention was Oklahoma was going to be a entirely Indian state. They were going to remove Indians from wherever they lived, and they were going to ship them to Oklahoma. And they started that process, but that was like something way back in Thomas Jefferson days that they did that. They're going to move all the Indians west of the Mississippi because colonists were coming in. They were getting more populated, so they were going to move the natives from their home from thousands of years and they were going to ship them all off to Oklahoma where Adolf Hitler himself based his concentration camps on the reservations. You know, he's seen how the government treated the natives, and he thought, well, we can do that to the people here. You know, well, they shipped them all over there. Well, in 1910, that Horace Durant come up here, and he started censusing the native people, not the whole population, but just native people. And he found out there were thousands of them here, and they all knew what band they were from, and they all knew their tribal leaders and their histories. And it just kind of shocked the government at that time. And so they did that because everybody was petitioning for they wanted to exercise their treaty rights. So that's how that's how that role got started. And so what happens with our people is we have to track ourselves to that 1910 roll. So to do that, you have to have, like, depending on your age, you had to have your parents and your grandparents until you hit someone that hit that 1910 roll, and then you had to have a paper trail to them, whether it be birth certificates for your parents, or if there was marriage licenses to show name changes, or adoption certificates, or anything you could get. And you had to have that whole trail and the family tree and then once you hit that Durant roll bingo, you showed that you were part of that tribe, and that goes back to, we use the government's own records to verify ourselves, you know. And then we have an enrollment committee of 5 people. When these people submit their enrollment stuff, they have to audit it to make sure every piece of paper is in there, and then 3 of the people have to sign it off that all the paperwork is done. And then from there, we have an enrollment clerk who redoes it to verify that it's accurate, and then from there it goes to our tribal council, and then they bring these people into the tribe. So they just can't say they're Grand River, you know, they have to. We're probably the only race in the world that has to document who we are, you know, but we can do that. You know, it's hard, and it's harder for some people, especially when adoptions were taking place and children were displaced not only to Michigan, but there's been wholesale things where they took them to other states and stuff, you know, and just took the children away. They wanted to get them away from their homes. But we can get into their adoption records and stuff. But it's not easy, but it's not hard either. And I guess it's hard, but it's doable because we can actually do that. But our whole intention is to get this established so that the next generation won't have to do it. And I'm retired now, so I got a lot of time. And I've gone to Washington several times. I've testified in congressional hearings, Senate hearings, 3 different times, you know. And I'm finding out that, because when I started this, I didn't know as much as I know now. But I find out I know more than them about it. You know, and I don't think there's a question they could ask me that I can't answer. You know, and then when their administrations change, they're just learning anew, and I've already been through it. As far as the cultural things I know, you gotta remember I had kids from all over the state, and I had kids from Washington, I had kids from Ontario, that they would bring their, see in the 1970s, there was a trend with the Native people called, we call them survival schools. And we were trying to teach these kids to survive in the world, you know. And so when these kids came in, they brought in all kinds of teachings from their homes, you know, from their grandmas, grandpas, aunties, uncles, and they all knew all this culture that was still being practiced in their homes. There's certain things you guys do with your children and your families that, I don't care if you're Irish or Italian or French or English, there's certain things you guys do that are a little bit different, you know. And when I have these kids from all over the place that bring this from their home, I'm the recipient of all this knowledge, you know. So I end up learning all this stuff from them, you know. I just end up, I'm the best beneficiary of that stuff.
What are things that communities like this one can do to support your efforts of recognition?
Well, you know, you brought up Hillary Skull and Rachel Hood to me. And Rachel actually had them do, what do they call it, a proclamation for us through the state. She's worked with us. And Hillary right now is sponsoring a bill for our recognition. You know, and I guess one thing you could do is pat them on the back. Write them a letter and tell them that you appreciate what they're doing and that, because they like to hear that too. You know, they like to hear that they get their support for their efforts, you know, and everybody does, you know. And one thing you could really do is just compliment those two on what they're doing and appreciate that their efforts to establish some sort of justice for a group of people. And we're not talking a lot of people. There's probably about less than 500 of us left. But we are the original people from Grand Rapids, and we can track ourselves here thousands of years ago. You know, but that's one thing you could do, and just.
Is there any way we could fundraise or publicize the struggle you're having? It would help.
Probably that's that.
Could you use money?
Oh yeah, because when I talked about that enrollment clerk in the committee, everything they do is pro bono. So they they just come, they realize, see, there's, okay, you know, but, the good part about that is when they do stuff voluntarily, they're doing it for a different cause. I mean, somebody paying them a big paycheck and come in and work 40 hours a week, and, you know, these people, you know, they're 24/7. Everything they're doing, they just do it, you know, because they see that need to do it, you know. But that's, you know, we can always use support for something, because I don't want to answer him too, but I want to finish you. This is a sad statement, but and Hillary Scollins actually working on this too. But and also actually we got a guy named Emerson Silverdale that's helping us out on this too, because I had to go to that level to get them to work with us. But to generate funds for, like, we have mailings and trips to Washington and anything from paper to copy machines to computers. And so we had and we're kind of limited in our grant writing because we're a specific group, and most grants want to have the general public. So when you're a specific group, it's hard to establish funds for that. Well, this is something that's haunting us from 2010, 11, and 2009 is our accountant went up for he actually started out pro bono, but he got caught for criminal sexual abuse. He was a tribal member out of Petoskey. So when this happened, he stopped filing our tax reports. See, we didn't know he did that. And when in fact, we went up and tried to get it from him several times, and he had a computer up there for him. And so what happened probably about 3 years ago, the Weggy Foundation wanted to give us a grant, right? And then when they looked us up, they said, well, your 501(c)(3) is suspended. And we said, why is it suspended? He says, because you didn't file tax reports for those 3 years. So we looked into it, and we couldn't get his stuff from him, you know. And I even went up there, and he told me to bring it to the powwow on Sunday, and then he never showed up, you know. And then, of course, what do the police do? The first thing is they take your computer, which was our computer. And then we couldn't fire him because it would have been wrongful termination because he wasn't convicted yet. You know, that went to trial a couple times. So you can't go and fire him because we can't be the judge and jury. The judge has to convict him. So we ended up getting another account, and we had to go to the bank. We got all the records from those, 20 years back. And then we filed our taxes from them, paid whatever we owed, and we're all current up to date. And then lo and behold, when the Weggy Foundation wanted to help us out, they said it's suspended. And so that's when we had to backtrack everything. And I'll tell you something, like that department is out in Ogden, Utah. So you got to deal with them by either electronically or letter writing. And they don't know what's going on either. They keep changing, and then there's something at the state level too. The nonprofit status comes from the state, so you got to deal with them. And we were all paid up. We did everything they said to do, but nobody. To me, it's like a basketball team that goes out and they keep passing the ball, but nobody wants to shoot. And so we keep going around in circles, and we can't get them to. Nobody that just, what do we got to do to lift the suspension? So that prevents us from soliciting funds now. It's just a real mind-boggling for us right now. Fortunately, the Gun Lake tribe, and they don't really want anyone to know this, but they've been really supporting us. And if I went to them this afternoon and says, I need $25,000, they would have me a check tomorrow. And they do that. They're very native-oriented. So they've been really supportive a lot of our stuff right now, but we've got certain building maintenance and our heat isn't on right now, so I don't know what's gonna happen when winter comes, but there's just different little things like that, and repairs and just that, so we're kind of stuck in that bind, but Hillary's actually gonna start championing that cause, that's what I mean, she's just really sees the need, you know.
We are about at our time. I know Tom has the microphone and a question ready. So we'll call this the last question, and then if you want to stay after that, we'll invite people to head out if they want to, and then if you'd like to answer Gillis's question, we can do that too. Tom, go for it.
Thank you. Have the counties along the Grand River and the state of Michigan formally recognized the Grand River bands? And is there still an Indian Bureau of Affairs that has recognized the Grand River bands? Would that be a point of influence?
Well, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is the one that has to do that determination. If you look on our website, Grand River Bands of Ottawa Indians, if you look on there, there's a list of supporters. And we have a lot of support letters from the counties and city governments and the state actually. There's a process you gotta go through the state where they're recognized, and the state has actually recognized us too. It's just the federal level that we have to do that. But look on that website and then there's a whole list of people, political people that actually, you know, I go talk to them and then I can supply any kind of documentation they want. You know, they realize that we're legit who we're doing and what we're trying to do, you know.
Thank you.
Can I get his question just one more?
I guess so.
Okay, well, Mike, you sort of answered it, but there's a lot of money flowing to the Saginaw, Chippewa, the Huron, Potawatomi, Waukegan, the Little River Band, and I know there's a certain amount of jealousy. I actually was a lawyer for the Huron Potawatomi Band before I retired, but the tribal chair, Laura Spur, whom you may have known, said, yeah, we're all cousins and we fight like relatives, and so there's kind of a lack of cooperation at some levels between these bands which are interrelated. And my question was, how much support are you getting? But apparently you're getting some from the Gun Lake Band. Are you getting any other?
Well, the Gun Lake Band is actually financially has helped us out quite a bit. The Huron Band has acknowledged and supported us. The Saginaw Chippewa Band does too. And the Waukegans kind of want to stay neutral. And the Little River Band won't. And that's a whole hour talking itself. But Little River Band's they got overtaken by people that don't have apathy for their people, and they all of a sudden they're very money oriented, their leadership, and
Indian politics are a lot like church politics. Thank you.
I'm sorry it took so much time. I didn't even go into a lot of issues I could. I know some people wanted me to talk about the Indian mounds and stuff and other things.
Just have to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe you can have me back tonight.
Well, and I believe that Marcia Kay and our social justice team is working on a trip to the mounds. So at the very least, we'll have a group that is open to folks where we can come and see that space and hear from you. Having been out there, it really is spectacular, and I'm sure you drive by the mounds, over the mounds actually, and are unaware that you're even there. So would you please join me in thanking Ron Yob for being with us. So we'll formally conclude our time, and I'm sure Ron will be okay hanging out for a couple minutes to ask any lingering questions. Thanks, everybody.